The poor elderly woman was expelled from her house by her miserable children. But when searching for food in a garbage can she found her husband's will, and when she began to read she was frozen. The first bite wasn't from hunger, but from the cold. That damp, penetrating cold that creeps under your clothes, however old they may be, and settles in your bones like a parasite that no longer wants to leave. 78 years. 78 springs, summers, autumns, and winters within the same four walls. I had watched them pass from the kitchen window with a steaming cup of coffee in my hands and the murmur of Julio's radio, my Julio's, in the background. Now those four walls had spat me out. They had vomited me onto this bench, with nothing more than the old dress I was wearing, a shawl that no longer provided warmth, and the worn leather purse where, ironically, I still kept the keys to a house that was no longer mine. It had been them. Roberto and Anna, my children, the blood of my blood, the laughter of my past, the absolute owners of my desolate present. The argument still echoed in my ears, a cruel echo that wouldn't fade. Mom, it's not personal, it's logical. This house is too big for you alone. Roberto's voice, cold, calculating, as if he were firing an incompetent employee. Him with his business suit that cost more than my 3-month pension. And besides, you're not safe here. What if you fall? What if something happens to you? We can't be watching over you 24 hours a day. Anna, with that tone of false concern that made my soul shrink. Her, who lived 40 minutes away by car and hadn't visited me in 3 months. I clung to the back of Julio's armchair. His armchair. The one with the worn arm where he used to rest his head to read the newspaper on Sundays. But this is my house, where I lived with your father, where I raised you both. My voice sounded weak, brittle, like a thread about to break. Dad's not here anymore, Mom. Roberto cut short, impatient, and memories don't pay the mortgage or maintenance. I've found a wonderful retirement home. With a garden and activities, you'll be better off. A retirement home? The word tasted like ash. I don't want to go to a retirement home. I want to stay in my house. I can take care of myself. Look, Mom, we're not going to argue. Anna raised her voice, her features, so pretty when young, contorted into a grimace of irritation. Roberto and I have decided. It's for the best. The house is already sold. The world stopped. The air disappeared from the room. Sold, I whispered. How sold? Without consulting me? You're too old to understand these financial matters. Roberto adjusted his tie knot, avoiding my gaze. The new owners take possession tomorrow. Your things, the essentials, are already packed. The rest, well, you know, old things. I couldn't believe it. I looked at their faces, searching for a crack, a glimpse of the compassion I must have taught them, of the love I had given them, but I saw nothing. Only haste, annoyance. The desire to get rid of a burden. You're my children, was all I managed to say. A last, desperate plea. Anna sighed, fed up. And that's why we worry about you. Come on, we'll help you pack. They didn't help me, they supervised. While I, with trembling hands, put photos, some clothes, the locket that Julio gave me on our 5th anniversary, into an old suitcase, they talked on their phones, laughed at some nonsense. My life, reduced to carry-on luggage. My history, discarded as old things. And then, the door. The squeak of the lock closing for the last time. The creak of the wood that had so often cradled my dreams. Roberto put my suitcase in the trunk of his car. Come on, Mom. We'll take you to the retirement home. I stood planted on the sidewalk, looking at the facade. The roses that Julio planted next to the porch were withered, almost leafless. No. The word came out of my mouth, clear and firm, for the first time in years. I'm not going. What? Anna put her hands on her hips. Mom, don't start with nonsense. Get in the car. No, I'm not going to a retirement home. I'll stay. Where? Who? My friends? Most were dead or in similar situations. I'll manage. Roberto laughed, a cutting laugh without humor. Manage? With what? With the misery your pension gives you? Please, be reasonable. I said no. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tightly. Do what you want with the house, with your money, but not with me. They exchanged a look that said she's senile, It's useless to argue. Roberto opened his mouth to say something, but Anna put a hand on his arm. Fine, she said, with a sudden calm that chilled me more than the street cold. Do what you want, but don't expect us to come rescue you when you realize your mistake. She took out her wallet, extracted some bills. 2, 3, 5 50-euro bills. She folded them and held them out to me. Take this. So you can't say we didn't. I didn't move my hand. The bills fell to the ground between us, like a tombstone marking the grave of our family. Roberto shook his head, disdainful. Your stubbornness is going to kill you, mother. Without saying another word, they got in the car. The engine roared, and they left me alone on the sidewalk, with a suitcase, the shawl, and 5 50-euro bills thrown at my feet. I picked them up, not out of pride, but out of pure animal necessity. I knew I would need them. The humiliation burned in my throat, but the survival instinct was stronger. And so I arrived here. At this bench, I had walked aimlessly, dragging the suitcase until my strength abandoned me. The park was small, anonymous, a place of passage. No one looked at me, or if they did, they quickly looked away. An elderly woman with a suitcase on a bench at 8 in the evening isn't a strange sight, it's a visual nuisance, something you want to ignore. My stomach rumbled, a cavernous and painful sound that twisted me inside. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, a coffee with milk and some cookies. The argument had stolen my appetite, but now the emptiness was physical, a claw scratching at my insides. I looked at the crumpled bills in my hand, 250 euros. It was all I had in the world. I couldn't spend it on food. Not yet. I didn't know how long it would have to last. Maybe I had to pay for a cheap pension, a shelter for the homeless. The idea made me shiver. I pulled the shawl tighter. But the hunger was insistent, a dull and constant pain that wouldn't give in. Across the path, right in front of my bench, were the garbage containers. From one of them, the green one, a poorly tied bag was sticking out. I saw the cardboard of a pizza, remains of something, my upbringing, my pride, a lifetime of decency, rebelled inside me. Elena Morales, rummaging through garbage. Julio would have died of disgust. But Julio was dead. And I was alive. And I was hungry. The internal struggle was brief but fierce. Dignity is a luxury that only those with full stomachs can afford. With a sigh that was almost a moan, I got up from the bench. My joints creaked in protest. I took the suitcase, I couldn't leave it alone, and crossed the street, dragging it like a wounded animal drags a trap on its leg. The smell was nauseating. I approached the green container. The lid was leaning, half open. With an uncontrollable tremor, I lifted it completely. The stench hit me hard. Food scraps, coffee, something sour. I breathed through my mouth, containing the wretches. I put my hand in, with disgust, pushing aside transparent plastic bags full of waste. And then I saw it. It wasn't food. It was an envelope, large, manila paper, thick. It was clean, almost new, thrown on top of a bag of salad scraps. It seemed out of place. Why would someone throw an envelope like that in the garbage? Maybe it was from some nearby office. It caught my attention. In an almost reflexive act, more to distract myself from the disgust of rummaging there, I took it. It was heavy. Inside there was something more than papers. I held it with my dirty fingers, undecided. Should I throw it away? What was I going to do with an old envelope? But something, an absurd hunch, made me keep it under my arm. I kept searching, with less conviction, until I found half a sandwich wrapped in transparent film. It looked like ham and cheese. It wasn't too bad. I put it in the pocket of my shawl. It was something to quiet the hunger monster for a while. I returned to the bench, feeling like the most miserable person on the face of the earth. I sat down, exhausted. I took out the half sandwich. I smelled it. It didn't taste bad. With my eyes closed, I bit a piece. It was hard, cold, but it was food. I chewed slowly, savoring every crumb, trying not to think about where it had been. The tears finally rolled down my cheeks, hot, cleaning furrows in the dirt. I cried silently, chewing my indigent dinner. When I finished, still hungry, but with the cramping somewhat calmed, I remembered the envelope. I had it beside me. On the bench, I took it. In the dim light of the street lamp, I examined it. It had no address. Only one word written by typewriter on the front, in capital letters, black and firm. Julio. I froze. My heart gave a wild leap in my chest, so strong I thought I was going to faint. No, it couldn't be. It was a coincidence. Julio was a common name. Thousands of men were named Julio. But the lettering, those perfect capitals, the J with that characteristic curl, it was my Julio's. He always used his old Underwood typewriter for important things. He said that printed letters had more weight, more solemnity. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The tremor wasn't from cold now, it was from pure terror, from an absurd and terrifying hope. What was an envelope with my husband's name, written by him, doing in a garbage container in front of the park where my children had abandoned me? It made no sense. None. With fingers that didn't seem mine, clumsy and numb with emotion, I opened the envelope flap. It wasn't sealed. Inside there was a bundle of papers. I took out the first one. It was thick, quality bond paper. At the top, centered, one word hit my sight like a hammer blow. Will. A broken sound, a gasp, escaped from my lips. The park spun around me. I had to grab the edge of the bench to keep from falling. Will, Julio's Will. But he had died 5 years ago. From a heart attack, sudden, there was no time for anything. I always assumed he had died intestate. Roberto's lawyers took care of everything. They said that, with no will, the inheritance went in equal parts to the forced heirs. Me, Roberto and Anna. The house was in my name from the beginning, so I kept it, and they received the money from his accounts, his investments. There was never a problem. There was never an argument. Until now. I breathed deeply, trying to calm myself. The light was bad. I had to see better. With a determination I didn't know I still possessed, I opened the suitcase. I searched among my scarce clothing until I found what I wanted, an old pocket flashlight, one of those round ones that I always kept for blackouts. I tested it. It worked. The light was weak, yellowish, but it was enough. I pointed the beam at the paper. The word will was still there, defiant, and below the text, typewritten with Julio's characteristic precision. I, Julio Antonio Morales, being of sound mind and body, he always liked to include something in English. He felt very modern, declare that this is my last will and revoke any other I may have made before. I kept reading. It was standard. He left some symbolic amounts to distant cousins, donated his books to the municipal library. Then, he got to the important part. As for my wife, Elena Maria Fernandez de Morales, I leave her. I held my breath. Confused, I kept reading. The flashlight trembled in my hand. To my beloved children, Roberto Julio Morales and Ana Isabel Morales, so they may divide them in equal parts. It is my wish that they use this patrimony to secure their future and that of their families with the wisdom and love I always instilled in them. There it was, what we had always believed, what the lawyers took for granted. Roberto and Anna would take everything except the house, which was mine. I kept the usufruct of the dwelling, but the money, the investments, were for them. We always knew that. Why then this paper? Why was it here? I adjusted the flashlight. Notwithstanding the above, it said, and due to circumstances I have discovered and which have led me to profound disappointment, I establish the following key and unavoidable condition for my children, Roberto and Anna, to be able to access said inheritance. My heart began to race again. A condition? What condition? In order for the inheritance mentioned above to be transferred to their names, they must demonstrate, in a reliable manner and before a notary, that their mother, Elena Maria Fernandez de Morales, has been cared for, respected, and has lived in the family home, the house at 12 Olivar Street, with all due comforts and attentions, until the day of her natural death. The air escaped from my lungs. A dry whistle. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I read it again and again. Any attempt to evict her, admit her to a residence against her will, or deprive her of her home and dignity, will be considered a direct violation of my last wishes. In such case, the totality of the inheritance, without exception, will automatically and entirely revert to my wife, Elena, invalidating any other previous clause. The world stopped, the noise of the cars, the wind, everything disappeared. Only I existed, the cold bench and that paper trembling in my hands like a leaf in a storm. I couldn't assimilate it. Giulio, he knew. He knew what was going to happen. He knew his children better than I did. He set this trap, this insurance, this last and grandiose show of his love for me. He wasn't leaving me just novels and a watch. He was leaving me everything. All his money, his investments, but with one condition, that I be safe, in my house, surrounded by their care. He was putting them to the test. He was offering them a fortune in exchange for my well-being, and they had failed. Horribly. But how? How didn't we know about this will? The lawyers said there wasn't one. The inheritance was settled as if it didn't exist. Roberto took care of everything. He was the one who spoke with the notary, who moved the papers. Suddenly, like a puzzle whose pieces fit together with a dull crash, everything made sense. Roberto found it. He must have found it after Julio's death. Maybe looking for papers, maybe reviewing the old office safe. He found it, read it, and hid it. He hid it because he knew that if it came to light, if it was proven to be the last will, they wouldn't see a cent until I died in my bed, probably decades later. And they didn't want to wait. They preferred quick money, the house sold, and to get rid of the burden that was me. And today, the day they finally threw me out. Someone, maybe Anna cleaning the attic for the new owners, or Roberto himself, had found the hidden envelope and, without even opening it, had thrown it in the garbage like something unimportant, like they had thrown me away. A wave of contradictory emotions swept over me. First, an immense and grateful love for Giulio that bent me at the waist, sobbing silently. He had protected me from beyond the grave. He had tried to save me. Then, a rage, a black, deep, devouring rage towards my children. How could they? How could they betray their father like that? And me, they didn't just take away my home, they stole my security, they lied to me. They had stolen the inheritance my husband destined for me. They had condemned me to indigence out of greed. The cold no longer existed. I burned inside. The will paper was hot under my fingers. It was my salvation, my revenge, my proof. I had to do something. Go to the police? To a lawyer? With what money? It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Everything would be closed. And I was here, alone, in a park, with everything I was worth in a suitcase. Suddenly, some headlights illuminated the street. A car, an expensive model, black and silent, reduced speed in front of the park. I didn't pay attention at first, until it stopped right in front of me. The engine turned off. My heart shrank. A horrible premonition ran down my spine. I pressed the will against my chest, hiding it instinctively under the shawl. The driver's door opened. Some expensive shoes of polished leather stepped on the asphalt. Then, long legs clad in a dark suit. Finally, the tall and familiar figure of my son, Roberto, stood up next to the car. His face was in shadows, but I would recognize it anywhere. He looked at me fixedly. He didn't move a muscle. Then the passenger door opened. Anna got out. She wore an elegant jacket and adjusted her purse nervously. She also stood next to the car, looking at me too. Their expressions were unreadable from the distance, but they didn't transmit warmth. They transmitted tension. Some guilt? No. Impatience. What were they doing here? How had they found me? Maybe they had driven around the neighborhood. Maybe a neighbor told them they had seen me heading towards the park. It didn't matter. They were here. Roberto began to walk towards me. His steps were firm, determined, echoing in the silence of the night. Anna followed him, one step behind. I remained petrified on the bench. Unable to move, to breathe, the will burned me through my clothes. They stopped 1 meter from me. Roberto looked me up and down, with a mixture of disdain and concern. No, it wasn't concern. It was irritation. "Mother," his voice said, cold as steel, "this has to end. You're making a fool of yourself." I said nothing. I just returned his gaze, clutching the hidden paper even tighter. Ina bit her lip. "Mom, please, it's cold. Get in the car. We'll take you to a hotel tonight, and tomorrow." No. The word came out of my mouth, clear and surprisingly firm. I'm not going to any hotel. Roberto sighed, exasperated. What do you want? To stay here and freeze? For what? To prove what? To prove nothing, I said, looking at him fixedly. I'm fine here. You're not fine, he exploded, losing his temper. His voice cut the air like a whip. Look at yourself, sitting on a bench with your suitcase. It's pathetic. People call us, tell us you're here, that you look like a beggar. You embarrass us. There it was, his real concern, his image, his reputation. I'm sorry for your embarrassment, Roberto, I said with a calm I didn't feel. But it's yours, not mine. He took a step forward. His figure was intimidating. Come on, mother, the nonsense is over. Give me the suitcase, and get in the car. He extended his hand to take the suitcase. I, by instinct, leaned forward to protect it, and in doing so the will which I had hidden under the shawl, moved in a corner showed. Roberto's eyes, quick as a predator's, caught it instantly. They remained fixed on the edge of the manila paper. His expression changed. The irritation vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous, recognition and pure panic. What? What is that? He asked, and his voice was no longer cold, but tense, shrill. I leaned back, trying to hide it again, but it was too late. Anna had also seen it. Her face visibly paled even in the penumbra. Nothing, I stammered. A paper I found. Roberto lunged. It wasn't a thoughtful movement, it was an act of animal instinct. His big and strong hand closed around my wrist, squeezing hard. I screamed in pain and surprise. Let me go, Roberto. Where did you get that? He hissed, bringing his face close to mine. His breath smelled of coffee and mint. Where? In the garbage. I shrieked, struggling to free myself. His grip was iron. Where you threw me? I found it in the container, like me. The confirmation was like an electric shock for him. His eyes opened extremely wide. He let go of my wrist suddenly, as if it had burned him, and took a step back. Anna brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes full of absolute terror. Give it to me, Roberto said, and his voice was now a low, threatening rumble. He extended his hand, not towards me, but towards the paper. Give it to me right now, mother. No, I replied, panting, rubbing my sore wrist. It's mine. It's from your father. For me. That paper is nothing, he shouted, completely losing his composure. It's a mistake, an old draft that Dad discarded. It's worth nothing. Give it to me. You're lying, I whispered, with more courage than I thought I had. You hid it. You threw it away, because you knew that if it came to light, you wouldn't get €1. The silence that followed was dense, heavy, charged with the weight of truth. Anna broke down crying silently, sobbing against her hand. Roberto didn't deny anything, he just looked at me. And in that look, for the first time that night, I saw something more than irritation or anger. I saw hatred, a pure and visceral hatred towards me, for having discovered his secret, for threatening his fortune, for existing. For the last time, he said, each word loaded with venom. Are you going to give me that paper? No, I said, putting the will inside my dress, against my heart, which beat like a war drum. Leave, Roberto. Go with your sister. You have nothing more to do here. He stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, like a bull about to charge. His fists were clenched at his sides. Then slowly, a cold and cruel smile drew on his lips. It was a smile that promised nothing good. Fine, he said, with chilling calm. You asked for it. He turned around and walked back towards the car. Anna looked at him, confused, and then looked at me, with tears running down her cheeks. She looked like a scared child. Roberto, what are we going to do? She asked, her voice broken. He didn't answer. He opened the driver's door and got inside. Anna, after one last desperate look at me, ran and got in the car. The engine started with a roar. I waited for them to leave. I waited for the headlights to move away, but they didn't. The car stayed there, still with the engine idling, the headlights pointing at me like the eyes of a beast waiting. What were they doing? Calling? Thinking? The seconds became minutes. I remained sitting, huddled around my secret, the paper that was my life, staring fixedly at the blinding headlights. Fear began to creep up my spine, drop by drop. This silence, this weight, was worse than their anger. Finally, the driver's door opened again. Roberto got out, but this time he didn't come towards me. He went to the back of the car. He opened the trunk. My breathing stopped. What was he going to take out? A shovel? No, it couldn't be. They were my children. No matter how angry they were. He took something out. It wasn't a tool. It was smaller. He held it in his hand and began to walk towards me. His steps were slow, measured, dangerous. As he approached, outside the blinding halo of the headlights, I could see what he was holding. It wasn't a weapon. It was an envelope. Another envelope. Large, light brown colored. He stopped in front of me, at the same distance as before. His expression was impenetrable, but his eyes shone with a cold and determined light. "You wanted to play, Mother," he said, and his voice was so soft it was almost inaudible over the rumble of the engine. "You wanted to dig into the past. You wanted to unearth things that should have remained buried." I said nothing. I just looked at him, with my heart in my throat. "You thought you had found the ultimate weapon, didn't you?" he continued, with that cruel smile again. "Dad's will, your golden ticket, your salvation." He raised the envelope he brought in his hand. "Well, you were wrong." He held it out to me. I mechanically, with a trembling hand, took it. It was light. Inside there were only a couple of sheets. What is this?" I managed to stammer. "It's reality, Mother," he said, with a voice loaded with horrible satisfaction. "The reality that Dad never wanted you to see. The reason why that will," he pointed with contempt at my chest, where I hid the other document, "should never have seen the light. The reason why, even if you take it to a judge, even if you try, it won't serve you, because there are things, Mother, that are more important than money." I looked at the envelope in my hands, not understanding, with a terror that froze my blood. "Open it," Roberto ordered, softly. "Read, and discover why Dad really wrote that will. Discover what he knew about you that you never knew he knew." His words were a poisoned riddle. My fingers, numb with fear, found the envelope flap and opened it. I took out the sheets it contained. They were photocopies, old, yellowed papers. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Were they receipts, bank statements, names, dates? And then my sight focused on a specific date, 37 years ago, a month after Anna was born, and on a man's name that wasn't Julio's, and an amount of money, a large amount, very large, transferred regularly for years. The world began to blur. A buzzing filled my ears. No, it couldn't be. "Yes, Mother." Roberto's voice sounded as if from very far away, sweet as poison. "Dad knew everything. He knew that Anna wasn't his daughter." The buzzing in my ears became a dull roar, a rough sea that drowned everything else. Roberto's car rumble, Anna's soft sobbing from the car, even the frantic beating of my own heart. The park, the night, the cold, everything faded until it was reduced to those 2 sheets of paper trembling in my hands as if an earthquake were shaking them. They weren't just receipts. They were the cold and meticulous chronicle of a lie, of my lie. Bank statements from an account I thought was secret, an account that Julio apparently had access to all along. Monthly transfers, considerable sums, and always the same recipient name, Luis Alberto Fernandez. My brother, or at least the man everyone believed was my brother. Dad knew everything. Roberto's voice cut through the fog of my shock, clear and sharp as a knife. He knew that Anna wasn't his daughter. The words didn't hit me like a blow, but like a slow and icy flood that covered me from feet to head, paralyzing me. I looked at the paper, then at Roberto, then at the paper again. My mind, numb, refused to connect the dots, to make sense of that bomb that had just exploded in my hands. "No," was all I could articulate, a hoarse whisper that was lost in the night. That's not true." "No." Roberto's smile was now of pure contempt, of bitter triumph. "Are you going to keep lying even now with the evidence in hand? Look at the date, Mother. The first transfer. A month after Anna's birth? Coincidence?" Dad wasn't stupid. He did his math, especially when he noticed that his brother-in-law's affection for his newborn daughter was excessive. Each word was an ice needle stabbing my skin. Luis, he was always there. Helping. Elena is exhausted, Giulio. Let me take the girl for a couple of hours. You two rest. How much she looks like you, Elena. She's just like you. The memories, innocent then, now took on a horrible shadow, twisting in my mind. He confronted you, didn't he? Roberto continued, his voice turned into an instrument of slow and precise torture. Not immediately. At first he just watched. He hired someone, and then, when he had all the pieces, he went to you. He told you. A flash, an argument. About 15 years ago? Giulio, pale, with an envelope very similar to this one in his hand. My fierce, hysterical denial. My accusations of paranoia. How could he think that of me? Of his own brother-in-law? I cried. I screamed. I swore on Anna's life that he was crazy. And he left. He left with drooped shoulders and a sadness in his eyes that broke my soul. The next day, we never spoke of the subject again. I thought I had convinced him that he had overcome his absurd jealousy. But no, he hadn't overcome it. He had kept the evidence, and he had planned his silent, meticulous revenge for all these years. He didn't leave you, Mother, Roberto said, as if reading my thoughts. He didn't divorce you for the family. For us, as you always believed, he stayed for us. To raise us, to make sure his children, he made a cruel emphasis on the word didn't suffer for their mother's sins, but he didn't forgive you. Never. The revelation was tearing me apart inside. My whole life with Giulio, all those years I remembered with a love tinged with the guilt of my secret, but also with gratitude that he had never discovered it, suddenly became a grotesque farce. He knew, he lived with that knowledge every day. He looked me in the eyes every morning knowing that Anna was another man's daughter. This will, Roberto pointed again at my chest, and I instinctively covered myself with my arm, protecting the manila paper as if it were my own child. Wasn't an act of love. It was a punishment, a final checkmate from the grave. He knew how Anna and I were. He knew we were ambitious, impatient. He knew that sooner or later we would try to take away your house, the burden, and he set this trap, not to protect you, poor deluded woman, to punish us, to force us to live together, in a lie, so that you would have to see every day the fruit of your deception, and so that we would have to take care of the woman who broke their father's heart. He used us, his legitimate children, as an instrument of his revenge against you. Each word was a hammer blow that brought down the foundations of my reality. The will wasn't an act of love. It was hatred, cold, patient, calculated hatred. The condition to take care of me wasn't for me, it was against them. Giulio saw me as a sinner, my children as my accomplices by default, and sentenced us all to an eternal condemnation of distrust and bitterness. A fierce nausea rose up my throat. I leaned over the bench, coughing, choking on shame, on pain, on rage. Against whom? Against Giulio, for his perfect cruelty. Against Roberto and Anna, for their greed. Against myself, for my stupidity, for my mistake from so many years ago. And Luis, I managed to ask between coughs, my voice barely a thread of sound. Roberto's smile widened, a horrible gesture of macabre satisfaction. Your lover? Your brothers? He spat the words. Dad ruined him, slowly, with the patience of an artisan. He cut off his credit, closed doors for him, diverted his contracts. He made his business go down the drain. Those transfers you see, he pointed to the papers in my lap, were what Dad forced you to give him from your monthly allowance, so he wouldn't starve to death after having left him in misery. A cruel charity, the ultimate humiliation. I remembered Luis's anguish in those years, his veiled pleas for help. I, from inside my bubble, as the wife of a wealthy man, gave him money from my savings, from what Giulio gave me for the house. I always thought it was because of his poor head for business. I never imagined it was Giulio, from the shadows tightening the screws. Everything was a lie. My whole marriage, my whole life. So you see, Mother, Roberto's voice returned to its cold and practical tone, that of a businessman closing an unfavorable deal. That will won't save you. It's proof of your own shame. If you present it, if you try to claim the inheritance, you'll have to explain all this. You'll have to confess, before a judge, your children, the world, that Anna is an illegitimate daughter, fruit of your adultery with a man you made pass for your brother. What do you think that will do to her? I looked towards the car. Anna, pale as death, watched me from the window, her eyes swollen from crying. Did she know? Did she know the truth? The expression of terror on her face wasn't just about the money, it was about the collapse of her own identity. You would destroy your daughter to save yourself, Roberto concluded, with devastating logic. Do you really want to do that to her? After everything? I felt empty, shattered. The weapon I thought I had had turned against me, poisoning me. Giulio, from his grave, had set the perfect trap for me. He gave me the option of living on the street, in misery, with my secret intact, or claiming what was mine in exchange for destroying my daughter's life and airing my shame before the world. It was a complete checkmate. Roberto saw the surrender in my eyes. He saw how the fire of my defiance was extinguished, replaced by the ice of desperation. He extended his hand again, but this time not with violence, but with the security of one who has already won. Give me the papers, Mother, he said softly. Both of them. The will and the transfers. I'll get rid of them, and this will never have happened. Anna doesn't have to know the complete truth. We can continue. Continue? I repeated, stunned. Continue how? How do you continue after they rip out your heart and show you it was never yours? We'll take you to the residence, he said, as if granting a great favor. A good one, not the cheap one we had found. One with a garden, like I said. You'll live comfortably, quietly, and we'll have what is ours by right. What Dad, deep down, always wanted us to have. It's best for everyone. Best for everyone. Empty echo. Best for them, for their conscience, for their pocket. To keep up appearances, I would be the crazy one, the decrepit old woman who had to be locked up in a nice residence. They, the solicitous children who did what they could. My fingers, cold and inert, closed around the will I had hidden. The paper that minutes before had been my salvation now burned my skin. It was proof of my guilt, of Giulio's betrayal, of the ruin of everything I had loved. Slowly, as if moved by strings I didn't control, I took the manila envelope out of my dress. I looked at it. The word Giulio drilled into my eyes. With my other hand, I picked up the photocopies from the ground where I had dropped them. Roberto waited, with his hand extended, the patience of the victor. What choice did I have? Destroy my daughter, Anna, who, although cruel and greedy, was innocent of all this. She hadn't asked to be born from a lie. She didn't deserve her life to be shattered for a mistake of mine from decades ago. With a sigh that seemed to tear my soul out, I stretched my arms and put both documents in my son's hand. He took them with a quick, almost eager movement. He reviewed them, making sure both were there. An expression of intense relief crossed his face. He put them in the inner pocket of his coat. Good, he said, adjusting his jacket. Very good. Now pick up your things. Let's go. He pointed to the suitcase with his head. I remained seated, looking at my empty hands. I no longer had anything. No will, no money, no dignity, no past. Nothing. Roberto. I murmured, and the sound of my own voice seemed foreign to me. How could you hide this? Know it, and… He looked at me, and for an instant, a fraction of a second, I saw something beyond the cold and calculating businessman. I saw the child whose father had shown him some terrible evidence, one day forever ruining the image of his mother. I saw the resentment that had grown in him for years, fed by his father's complicit silence. The will wasn't just Julio's punishment for me, but the inheritance of his hatred for his son. Dad gave it to me, he said, and his voice lost its hardness for a moment, sounding simply tired, aged. A month before he died, he called me to his study. He gave me the envelope. He told me, when she leaves this house, which will be soon, give her this. So she knows I always knew, so she knows I won. The tears which had refused to come out before, now flowed with an uncontainable force. Silent, hot, they furrowed my face without me doing anything to stop them. Giulio didn't just want to punish me. He wanted me to know that he had won, even dead. Roberto saw my pain, and for once made no derogatory comment. He simply turned around. Pick up the suitcase, Mother, he repeated, walking towards the car. Anna is waiting for you. I looked towards the car. Anna had gotten out and was standing next to the open door. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it pity? Hatred? Relief? Fear? Maybe a bit of everything. With automaton movements, I stood up. My legs barely supported me. I grabbed the suitcase handle, that suitcase that contained the remains of my previous life, a life I now knew had been a fiction. I dragged my feet across the sidewalk. Each step cost me a world. I approached the car. Anna said nothing. She just stepped aside so I could get into the back seat. The interior was heated, perfumed. The luxury felt aggressive to me, a reminder of everything I had lost, of everything that had never really been mine. Anna closed the door behind me. The sound was definitive. The click of the lock sounded like the slam of a cell door. She sat in front, next to Roberto, who was already at the wheel. Neither of them said a word. Roberto put the car in gear and we started off, leaving behind the bench, the park, the garbage containers, leaving behind the Elena, who believed she had one last chance. I looked out the window at the city lights passing by, blurred by my tears. I hadn't won. Julio had won. Roberto and Anna had won. I was left with nothing, with a secret that would choke me from within, with the shattered image of the man I loved, with the knowledge that my children would take care of me not out of love, but to silence me, to hide the family shame. And then, just as the car took a gentle curve, my fingers, resting on the leather seat, touched something. Something that had fallen from Roberto's or Anna's pocket, or that perhaps had been there before. Something small, rectangular, hard plastic. Without making any noise, without them noticing, I closed my hand around it and slipped it into the pocket of my shawl. I didn't look at what it was. I didn't dare. But it was something, an object. A small and tangible thing in a world that had become pure smoke and mirrors. And in the middle of the desolate cold that consumed me, that small unknown thing in my pocket was the only glimmer of warmth, of mystery, of a remote and impossible possibility that clung to me like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of wood. The car went into the night, taking me towards my new confinement, towards my bought silence, but in my pocket, hidden, beat a small, tiny secret that was mine alone. The journey was a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the almost inaudible hum of the engine and the slight creak of leather every time Roberto adjusted his posture at the wheel. Not a word, not a glance in the rearview mirror. I looked out the window, watching how the bright lights of the city center gradually faded, replaced by the quieter and more residential penumbra of the outskirts. We weren't going to a hotel. I was going to my new destination, my golden cage. The object in my pocket seemed to weigh a ton, although I knew it was light. It was my only anchor point in a world that was crumbling. I didn't dare take it out. Look at it. I feared that the slightest movement would betray my small act of rebellion, the last one I had left. Finally, the car turned and entered a tree-lined path, flanked by high wrought iron gates that opened with a soft automatic hum. We passed through impeccable gardens, although at this hour they were only dark and trimmed shapes under the light of colonial-style street lamps. The main building was large, of light stone, with symmetrical windows and a wide entrance with columns. It looked like a luxury hotel, or a high-security prison. The Sunset Residence, Roberto announced, for the first time since we had left the park. His voice sounded hoarse, as if it cost him effort to break the agreed mutism. It has all the amenities: heated pool, occupational therapy, personalized menus. He enumerated the virtues of the place like a real estate agent selling a property. He didn't mention the word prison, but it resonated in the air between us. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. The porch lights were on, illuminating a heavy wooden door with shiny hardware. "Anna, help her," Roberto ordered without moving from his seat. Anna, who had been motionless like a statue during the entire journey, started slightly. She nodded, without saying a word, and got out of the car. She opened my door. "Come on, Mom," she said, and her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. There was no trace of the desperate crying from before, nor of the hysterical irritation, just a tired emptiness. I got out of the car, grabbing my suitcase. The air here smelled different, of trimmed flowers, of damp earth, of cleanliness, an artificially pleasant smell. Roberto also got out and walked towards the main door. We followed him, Anna one step behind me, like an elegant jailer. Before Roberto could knock, the door opened. A woman of about 50, in an impeccable business suit and a professional and cold smile, greeted us. "Good evening, Mr. Morales. We were expecting you," she said, with a soft and modulated voice that didn't reach her eyes. "I am the director, Victoria Mansilla." "Good evening, Victoria." Roberto nodded with a gesture of forced familiarity. "I bring you my mother, Elena Morales." The director directed her plastic smile at me. "Mrs. Morales, welcome to your new home. We are delighted to have you with us." "Your new home." The words sounded as false as her smile. I nodded slightly, unable to articulate a sound. "If you would be so kind as to follow me, we can go through reception to sign the last documents, and then I'll show you Mrs. Morales's suite," Victoria said, turning and guiding us through a wide and silent lobby. Everything was clean, ordered, decorated with expensive but impersonal furniture. It smelled of air freshener flowers, of that aroma that tries to imitate nature and only manages to remind you that you're in an artificial place. Nothing could be heard, not a television, nor a radio, nor laughter, just the echo of our steps on the shiny marble. We reached an office. Victoria sat behind a polished oak desk. Roberto sat in front of her. Anna and I remained standing, like spectators. "They're just some admission forms, routine things," Victoria explained, taking out a folder. "Medical history, authorizations, consent for activities." Roberto took the pen she offered and began to sign on the tabs marked with post-its. He signed with his quick and confident signature, without reading a single line. He was selling his mother, and he did it with the efficiency with which he would sign a purchase agreement. Each scratch of the pen on paper was a door closing behind me. I clung to the handle of my suitcase until my hand hurt. "And of course the authorization for the administration of your pension," Victoria said, pointing to the last page. "So you don't have to worry about anything. We take care of all expenses directly." There it was, the last nail in the coffin. They weren't just locking me up, they were also confiscating my only source of income, however miserable it was. The 250 euros I had would turn to smoke. I would no longer even have the illusion of being able to choose. Roberto signed the last page with a final gesture. "Perfect," Victoria said, collecting the documents with a satisfied smile. "Now, if you would like to accompany me." We left the office and began walking down a long carpeted hallway. The walls were decorated with bland watercolors of landscapes and flowers. The doors, numbered, were all closed. From some of them, a faint bluish glow from a television filtered. From another, a slight moan, immediately muffled by the oppressive silence of the place. "Here we have the common room," Victoria pointed out, opening a double door that led to a large room with sofas, armchairs, and a large turned-off television. It was empty. Activities are in the mornings, gentle gymnastics, crafts, music therapy. It was an empty stage, waiting for actors who didn't want to be there. We kept walking. The hallway seemed endless. Finally, we stopped in front of a door with the number 27. Victoria inserted a magnetic key and opened it. "Your suite, Mrs. Morales," she announced, gesturing for me to enter. The room was correct. It wasn't a prison cell. Certainly, it was spacious, with a large single bed, a built-in wardrobe, a nightstand, a small desk, and an armchair. It had a private bathroom with support bars in the shower. Everything was clean, neutral, impersonal. There was nothing that made it mine. The windows were large, but they had decorative bars on the outside that, although they pretended to be an aesthetic element, couldn't hide their true function to prevent falls or escapes. "Breakfast is from 7 to 9 in the main dining room. The daily menu is on the bulletin board," Victoria said. "If you need anything, there's a call button next to the bed. Nursing is available 24 hours. Roberto nodded, looking around with a critical expression, as if evaluating an investment. "It's fine. Very good." Aina stayed at the door, without entering, looking at the floor. "Well," Roberto said, clapping his hands lightly, the sound absorbed in the carpet, "I think everything is in order. Mother, you'll be fine here. We'll call you." He approached and gave me a quick and dry kiss on the cheek. His skin smelled of expensive cologne and mint. A sudden disgust made me pull away slightly. He didn't seem to notice, or cared little. He headed towards the door, Anna still hadn't moved. He looked at her. Anna, let's go. She raised her gaze and looked at me. For an instant, our eyes met. In hers I saw a whirlwind of emotions. Pain, rage, shame, and something that could be perhaps a last glimmer of the daughter she once was. Her lip trembled slightly. She opened her mouth as if to say something. Anna, Roberto's voice was a sharp reminder, a lash. She closed her mouth. The glimmer in her eyes went out, replaced again by emptiness. She lowered her head and turned on her heels, following her brother down the hallway. Victoria smiled at me one last time. Rest, Mrs. Morales. Tomorrow will be a new day. And she closed the door. I heard the metallic click of the lock engaging. They hadn't given me a key. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the sound of their footsteps moving away down the hallway until they disappeared completely. An absolute silence fell over me, so thick I could hear the hum of the ceiling lamp and the accelerated beating of my own heart. I was alone, locked up, without money, without a past, without a future. The suitcase slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor with a dull thud. I let myself fall onto the edge of the bed, which creaked under my weight. The bedspread was of a rough and cold fabric. The tears, which had been waiting for their moment, flowed again, but this time, they weren't silent. They were deep, heart-wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for Julio, for his love turned to hatred, for his perfect revenge. I cried for Roberto and Anna, for the children I had lost long before today. I cried for myself, for the naive woman who believed in eternal love, who made a mistake and paid for it her whole life without knowing it. I cried until my sides hurt, until I was out of breath, until the tears dried up, and I was left with only a resonant and painful emptiness. The cold of the room began to chill me. It wasn't the damp cold of the street, but another more insidious one, the cold of loneliness, of hopelessness. I got up, and by pure inertia, opened my suitcase. I took out my old flannel nightgown, the one I always wore in winter. I took off the dress, which smelled of smoke and street, and put on the nightgown. The touch of the fabric, familiar and worn, was a small comfort. It was one of the few things that still truly belonged to me. When folding my dress to put it away, the object in the shawl pocket hit against my hand. I had forgotten about it. With an accelerated heartbeat, I took it out. I held it in the palm of my hand, under the cold light of the lamp. It was a memory card, a small SD card, inside a transparent plastic case. It had no label, no indication of what it might contain. Whose was it? Roberto's. Had it fallen from his pocket, or was it Anna's? Something she had kept. I observed it, turning it between my fingers. It was so small, so insignificant, and yet at that moment it was the most important object in the world. It was a mystery, a last thread that connected me to the outside, to the truth, to something that wasn't this silent room and this ruined life. But I had no way to access it. I didn't have a computer, nor a tablet, nor a phone. I was completely disconnected, isolated. A wave of frustration flooded me. I had the key to something, but I didn't have the lock. I dropped the card on the nightstand, next to the nurse call button. It was useless. A piece of plastic without value. I got into bed. The sheets were clean but cold. I turned off the light. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint orange glow of the garden streetlight that filtered through the window bars. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, trying to escape even for a few hours, but the images kept spinning in my head. Julio's face when he confronted me, Roberto's cruel smile, Anna's crying, the manila envelope, the bank transfers. And then, something clicked in my mind, a detail that in the whirlwind of emotions had gone unnoticed. Roberto had said, "Dad gave it to me. A month before he died. He called me to his study. He gave me the envelope. He told me, when she leaves this house, which will be soon, give her this, so she knows I always knew, so she knows I won." Julio had given Roberto the envelope a month before he died. But the will I had found. I reviewed it mentally. I remembered the date typewritten at the bottom of the document. It had been signed and dated more than 7 years ago. Shortly after our big argument, shortly after he overcame his jealousy. My breathing caught in my chest. If the will was from 7 years ago, and Giulio had given it to Roberto only a month ago, that meant that Giulio had kept it hidden all those years, that he had waited, that he had lived with me, day after day, with that document hidden somewhere, knowing it was his time bomb, his last move in the chess game of our marriage. But why? Why not use it before? Why not divorce me then, when the pain must have been fresher, more furious? Why wait so long? And then, the other question, more urgent, more terrifying. If Giulio gave Roberto an envelope a month ago, did the envelope contain only the photocopies of the transfers, or did it contain both things, the transfers and the will? Roberto said that Dad told him to give it to me, so I would know he always knew that fit with the transfers. But, and the will? The will wasn't proof that he knew. The will was a punishment for the children, a condition. Why would Giulio want me to know that? Wasn't it counterproductive? If I knew the condition, I could have tried to fulfill it. I could have tried to get Roberto and Anna to treat me well so they would receive their inheritance. Nothing fit. Roberto's story had holes. Big holes. I sat up abruptly in bed, my heart galloping. Was he lying? Had there been two envelopes? One with the will, which Roberto found and hid years ago, and another with the transfers, which Giulio did give him a month ago. And had Roberto joined both in his narrative to confuse me, to disarm me? Or another possibility, even more wild and terrible, what if the will wasn't what it seemed? What if there was something more? I stared fixedly at the nightstand, at the small SD card that was barely visible in the penumbra. That card wasn't a coincidence. It hadn't fallen from Roberto's pocket. He was meticulous, orderly. He didn't carry loose things in his pockets. What if he had dropped it on purpose? The idea was so absurd, I almost dismissed it. Why would he do that? To torture me more, to give me a clue I couldn't follow. But then I remembered his expression when he gave me the photocopies. It wasn't just cruelty, there was something else, something almost desperate. And the fact that he hadn't taken my shawl from me, that he hadn't searched me. He knew I had the card. He had to know it. Suddenly, the silence of the residence no longer seemed so oppressive to me. It seemed full of possibilities, of danger. I got out of bed and turned on the light. I grabbed the card. I held it tightly in my hand. I needed to see what was on it. I needed a computer. I looked around at my golden cage. Where could I find one? The director's office, surely, but it was locked. The common room, maybe there would be one there for residents' use, but at this hour it would be closed. Tomorrow, I would have to wait until tomorrow. But anxiety was eating me up inside. I couldn't wait. Every minute in this room was torture. I left my room and peered into the hallway. It was empty, illuminated by faint emergency lights. In the distance, in a corner, I saw a small nursing station. A woman in a white uniform was sitting behind a counter, reading a magazine. She didn't see me. I breathed deeply. I had to risk it. I walked stealthily down the hallway, moving away from the nursing station, in the opposite direction from the main exit. I passed in front of closed doors, some with soft snoring behind them. At the end of the hallway, there was a double door I recognized, the common room. I tried the handle. It was locked. I cursed silently. I looked around, searching for an alternative. A sign with an arrow pointed to the left. TE Room de Library. I followed it. The hallway made a turn and led to a smaller room. It was furnished with low sofas and shelves full of books. And there, in a corner, on a low table, was a computer, an all-in-one unit, with the screen black but with a small green light indicating it was in standby mode. I looked back. The hallway was empty. I approached the machine with my heart in my mouth. I touched the screen. It lit up immediately, showing a screensaver with a generic photo of a sunset. It asked for a user password. My hope plummeted. Of course, it would be restricted. Desperate. I moved the mouse. The screensaver went away, revealing the Windows desktop, but before I could see anything, a pop-up window appeared in the center, asking for access credentials. User guessed, it said in one field, and below password. Guessed? Maybe I didn't need a password. Maybe for basic access. With trembling fingers, I typed guessed in the user field and pressed enter. The computer emitted a soft sound, and the cursor spun for a moment. Then, the window disappeared, and the desktop loaded completely. It had worked. Guest access didn't have a password. I almost fainted from relief. I looked for a slot for the SD card. The unit didn't have one. Damn. I looked around. On the side I saw a USB port. Would I need a reader? Where was I going to find a reader at this hour? And then, like a gift from heaven, I saw something stuck to the bottom of the table. It was a small USB hub with several slots, and one of them was specifically for SD cards. With bated breath, I connected the card to the slot. An icon immediately appeared on the screen, an icon of a removable disk labeled NO_name. I double-clicked. The folder opened. It contained only one file, a video file. It was called for_Elena.mp4. My hand froze on the mouse. A video? For me? I looked around again. The hallway was still empty. The only sound was the hum of the computer. With a knot of terror and expectation in my throat, I double-clicked on the video file. The Windows player opened. The screen stayed black for a moment, and then the image appeared. It was Julio. He was sitting in his armchair, in his armchair, in his armchair. The one with the worn arm. He was in his study, surrounded by his books, with the floor lamp lit beside him. He looked older than in my memories, thinner, with more gray hair. But they were his eyes, those clear and intelligent eyes that now looked at me from beyond the grave. He wore the old velvet robe he loved so much. He had his hands together on his lap. He breathed deeply and began to speak. His voice was the same, a little weaker perhaps, but firm and clear. The voice that had cradled my dreams for 40 years. "Elena," he said, and a stab of pain so sharp pierced my chest that I had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. "If you're seeing this, it's because I've died, and it's because, finally, Roberto has done what I always knew he would do." He paused, looking fixedly at the camera, as if he could see me. "I know what you're thinking. I know you believe I hate you, that I've set a trap for you from the grave, that this will is my last revenge." His lips sketched a sad, tired smile. "And I don't blame you for thinking it. For years, that's what I felt. Hatred, rage. A pain so deep I thought it was going to devour me alive. When I discovered the thing with Luis, when I confirmed that Anna wasn't mine, I wanted to destroy you, destroy everything." He lowered his gaze to his hands for a moment, as if searching for words there. "That's why I wrote that will. 7 years ago, it was an act of pure rage. I wanted to tie you and my children with a golden chain. I wanted to force them to live together, in a lie, so that you would have to see every day the fruit of your deception, and so that they would have to take care of the woman who betrayed their father. It was cruel, and it was unfair, to everyone." He raised his gaze again. His eyes shone with an intensity that left me breathless. "But time heals almost everything. Elena. Not forgetting it. Never. But I stopped hating you. I began to remember the woman I married, the mother of my children, the companion of my life. And I understood that a mistake, however big it may be, doesn't erase 40 years of love." A tear escaped from my eye and rolled down my cheek, falling on the Formica table. "The will that Roberto showed you, the one you found in the garbage, is false." The statement was so dry, so unexpected, that I stopped breathing. "Yes, Elena? It's false," he repeated, with a slight gesture of contempt. "It's a copy that I myself altered. The condition that they take care of you in the house was a cover, a bait. I knew that Roberto, with his greed, couldn't resist hiding it. I knew that sooner or later he would try to get rid of you to collect the complete inheritance, and I needed him to do it. I needed him to throw you out, so that this video, my real last will, would make sense." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was spinning, trying to process it. False? Everything was a lie? "The real will," Julio continued, his voice gaining strength, "the one that is deposited in the notary office of Fernandez and Associates under protocol number 45978B, is much simpler and much more just." He paused, looking me in the eyes through the screen, making sure every word sank in. "In it, I leave everything to you. Elena. Absolutely everything. The house, the money, the investments, everything. To Roberto and Anna, I leave €1 each. Literally, €1. As a symbol of what their silent complicity, their ambition, and finally, their betrayal of their own mother was worth to me. A sob escaped from my chest. I covered my mouth with my hand to muffle it. They don't know the real Will exists, Giulio said. They think the one they hid is the only one. That's why they acted as they did. I manipulated them, Elena. I used them as I used my own pain to reach this moment, so that you, in the end, would be safe. So that you would have the power, so that you could choose. Giulio's image began to blur before my eyes, clouded by tears. The money is yours. The house is yours. The decision is yours. You can forgive them, if your heart asks you to, or you can leave them with what they deserve, €1 and a life lesson. I'm no longer here, but I've returned your freedom to you, and your dignity. He smiled, a genuine smile this time, full of infinite love and sadness. I loved you, Elena. Despite everything, I always loved you. Forgive me for the pain I caused you. And, love, live the time you have left to live. Be happy, for both of us. He raised his hand in a farewell gesture, and the screen went black. I remained there, nailed to the chair, trembling from head to toe. The tears ran down my face uncontrollably. But they were no longer tears of pain. They were of liberation, of an emotion so vast and powerful, it had no name. Giulio. My Giulio. He hadn't hated me, he had loved me until the end. He had woven the most elaborate plot, the most perfect lie, not to take revenge, but to save me, to give me the last word. Everything was mine. Everything. And then, I heard a noise. Footsteps approaching down the hallway. Quickly, I removed the SD card from the reader and hid it in the pocket of my nightgown. I closed the video player window and turned off the computer screen, leaving it as I had found it. I turned around, quickly wiping the tears from my face with the back of my hand. The nurse, who was at the counter, appeared at the entrance to the library. She looked at me with surprise. "Mrs. Morales, are you all right? What are you doing here at this hour?" I straightened up, adjusted my nightgown and looked at her. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt that the person I had been, the strong Elena, the one who had raised 2 children and survived a complicated marriage, existed again. "I couldn't sleep," I said, and my voice sounded firm, clear, full of a new calm. I was just planning my future. The nurse looked at me, puzzled. "Well, do you need anything? A sleeping pill?" "No," I smiled, a small but genuine gesture. "I don't need anything, thank you." And I walked past her, with my head high, heading back to my room, not to my cell, to my temporary suite. Because now I knew, this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, everything would change. I had a call to make, to the notary office of Fernandez and Associates. And I had a visit to receive. The nurse followed me with her gaze as I walked back down the hallway, but she said nothing more. My back felt the weight of her curiosity, but also a new rectitude. The bones which before creaked with the weight of defeat now seemed to align with a forgotten determination. When I closed the door of room 27 behind me, the click of the lock no longer sounded like condemnation. It sounded like an interlude, a necessary breath before the next act. The room was still the same, cold, impersonal, the hard bed, the smell of aggressive cleanliness, but I was no longer the same. I carried within me a burning secret, a beacon that illuminated every corner of that golden prison and made it temporary, insignificantly small. I sat on the edge of the bed, not from desperation, but to plan. The SD card, now warm from contact with my skin, was my talisman. The evidence that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the despicable adulteress who deserved to rot in oblivion. It was proof of the most tortuous and complex love imaginable. Giulio. Oh, Giulio. The pain for his loss returned, but this time it was pure, bittersweet, freed from the poison of betrayal and resentment. I had loved him, and he, in his twisted and magnificent way, had loved me until his last breath. His revenge hadn't been against me, but against the lie, and his final legacy wasn't hatred, but restitution. He had returned the helm of my life to me. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. 2:17 a.m. The hours until the notary office opened seemed like an abyss of unfathomable time. Every minute that passed here was another minute of victory for Roberto and Anna. Another minute in which they believed they had won, but I couldn't sit idly by. Anxiety was an engine that made my hands vibrate. I needed to do something, anything. I opened my suitcase again. I took out the clothes, what little I had, and folded them meticulously in the empty drawers of the wardrobe. I hung yesterday's dress, now stained with tears and street dust, behind the door. They were small, insignificant acts, but they anchored me in reality, reminded me that I still had a body to dress, a life to order, however disordered it was. Then, I sat in the armchair, facing the window. The decorative bars drew crude shadows on the floor, cutting the streetlight's glow into bars. I watched them. They no longer seemed like a threat to me, but a reminder of the cage I was about to free myself from. What about them? Roberto, Anada, what would they feel now? Would they sleep peacefully, satisfied at having resolved their mother's problem? Or would remorse, or fear that their secret would come to light, gnaw at them from within, as I believed it would gnaw at me? Anna. The image of her pale and devastated face in the park came back to me. She didn't know. Roberto had shown her the transfers, told her she was another man's daughter, plunged her into the same pit of shame and pain I had fallen into. But she didn't know the depth of her father's game. She was a pawn, just as I had been, or wasn't she? Had she been an accomplice from the beginning? Her greed, her haste to get rid of me, did it stem only from ambition, or from deeper knowledge? I didn't know, and that doubt was a thorn stuck in the side of my renewed determination. Time passed with agonizing slowness. I watched how the deep black of the sky began to dilute into a dark blue, then into a pale gray. The birds began their morning symphony, a vital sound alien to the mortuary silence of the residence interior. At 6 o'clock I heard the first sounds of life in the hallway, the soft rattle of a cart, the murmur of low voices. The machinery of the Sunset residence was starting up. At 7, a soft knock on the door. A nursing assistant, young and with a tired smile, entered with a tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Morales. I've brought you breakfast." She placed the tray on the small table, a glass of orange juice, a cup of coffee with milk, toast with butter and jam, everything with impeccable and cold presentation. "Thank you," I said, and my voice sounded hoarse from the sleepless night. The assistant looked at me with slight surprise, as if she expected me to complain or cry. "Do you need help with?" "No, I'm fine. Thank you," I interrupted her gently. She nodded and left, leaving me alone with the aroma of coffee, which suddenly seemed delicious to me. I was hungry. Really hungry. I took the toast and bit it with determination. It tasted like paper, but it was food, energy, fuel for what was coming. At 8, I dressed in the same dress from the day before. I had nothing else. I combed my hair with my fingers, washed my face with cold water. My reflection in the bathroom mirror was still that of an elderly, tired woman with deep, dark circles. But in my eyes, which yesterday were extinguished and full of terror, today there was a glimmer, a fixed and defiant point of light. At 8:30, I left my room. The hallway was illuminated with natural light, coming through large windows at the end. I saw other people, residents, moving slowly, some helped by assistants, others pushing walkers. Their faces were masks of resignation or confusion. I wasn't one of them. Not yet. I walked directly to the director's office. The door was open. Victoria Mansilla was behind her desk, typing on the computer. Seeing me in the doorframe, she looked up, her professional smile already rehearsed. "Mrs. Morales. Good morning. How did you wake up? Everything all right in the room?" "Yes, everything's fine." I entered and closed the door behind me. The gesture surprised her. "I need to make a phone call. Urgent." Her smile froze for an instant. "Of course. Is it to talk to your children? You can use the reception phone." "No." I cut short. "It's not for my children. It's for my lawyer." The word lawyer had the expected effect. A slight blink of alert crossed her imperturbable eyes. "Mrs. Morales, I don't think it's necessary." "Victoria," I said, resting my hands on her desk and leaning slightly towards her. My voice was low but firm, charged with an authority I hadn't used in years. You don't know me, and you have no idea of the family situation that brought me here. I suggest you don't interfere in my legal affairs. I just need the phone now." She looked at me fixedly, measuring me. I didn't look away. I held her gaze with a calm that was for the most part authentic. Inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs. Finally, she nodded, with a stiff gesture. "As you wish." She turned the phone on her desk towards me. "Dial 9 for an outside line." "Thank you." I took the receiver. My fingers trembled slightly, but I pressed them firmly. I took out from my pocket an old address book, which was the only thing I had brought from the house besides clothes. I searched through the worn pages. Fernandez and Associates. Julio always said he was the best notary in the city. I was going to check it. I dialed the number. It rang twice before a female voice, efficient and cordial, answered on the other side. "Fernandez and Associates Notary Office. Good morning." "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice from betraying the inner tempest. "I would like to speak with Mr. Fernandez, please. It's regarding my husband's will, Julio Morales." "On behalf of whom?" "Elena Morales, his wife." A brief pause. I heard the typing of a computer. "One moment, please, Mrs. Morales. I'll put you through." The wait seemed eternal to me. I heard Victoria watching me from her seat, with an expression now openly intrigued and cautious. "Mrs. Morales," a male voice grave and serene, sounded on the other side. "Antonio Fernandez, speaking. How can I help you?" I breathed deeply. "Mr. Fernandez, my husband Julio Morales, told me, that is, I found out that he deposited his last will in your notary office, the real one." The silence on the other side was absolute for a few seconds that seemed like hours to me. "Mrs. Morales," he finally said, with palpable caution. "Indeed, Mr. Morales deposited a will in this notary office about a year ago, under strict confidentiality instructions. And," my voice almost broke, Can you tell me what its contents are?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," he replied, with firmness but without rudeness. "I can only reveal the contents of the will to the person designated as executor or once the testator's death has occurred, and always in the presence of the forced heirs and—" "Julio is dead," I interrupted, unable to contain the desperation. "5 years ago, and his children have thrown me out of my house. They've locked me up here, and I have reasons to believe that the will they handled is false." My words came out in a torrent, broken, charged with an emotion I could no longer contain. On the other side of the phone, another silence was made, but this one was different, more charged. "Mrs. Morales," the notary said, and his tone had changed. It was softer, almost concerned. "Calm, please. Where are you?" "At the Sunset Residence," I sobbed, defeated by frustration. "They locked me up last night." "Listen to me carefully," he said, and his voice acquired a new urgency. "Don't sign anything. Don't accept anything from anyone. I myself will come to see you today. What time can visits be received?" "I don't know." I looked at Victoria, who was watching me with very wide eyes. "What time are visits received?" I asked her, covering the microphone with my hand. From 11 o'clock, she said, disconcerted. "Did you hear that?" I said to the notary. "Yes, I'll be there at 11 sharp. Wait for me, Mrs. Morales. And be careful." He hung up. I was left with the receiver in my hand, trembling from head to toe, but with a spark of hope lit in my chest. He was coming. He was going to come. I hung up the phone and leaned on the desk, trying to catch my breath. Victoria looked at me fixedly. "Mrs. Morales, is everything all right? Do you need me to call someone? Your children, perhaps?" "No," I said, straightening up. Fear had transformed into a nervous, electrifying energy. "Don't call my children. I have a visit at 11, from Notary Fernandez. Please make sure I can receive him in a private place." She opened her mouth to say something, but thought better of it. She nodded, slowly. "Of course. You can use the visiting room in the East Wing. It's more discreet." "Thank you." I turned and left her office, leaving her with her bewilderment and doubts. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I walked through the gardens, under the attentive gaze of some assistant, feeling the morning sun on my face. It was a cold sun, of late autumn, but I felt it as a balm. I watched the other residents. A very elderly woman smiled at me from her wheelchair. A man walked slowly, murmuring to himself. They were ghosts trapped in their own stories. I, for the first time, had the key to get out of mine. At exactly 11 o'clock, I saw a black and discreet car stop in front of the main entrance. A tall man with gray hair and impeccably dressed in a classic cut coat got out of the vehicle. He carried a leather briefcase. Antonio Fernandez. I recognized him from some photo that Julio had. I got up from the garden bench where I was sitting and walked towards the entrance. Victoria was already there, waiting for him with her professional smile back, but somewhat tenser. "Mr. Fernandez, welcome," she said. "Mrs. Mansilla." He nodded with a bow of his head. His eyes found me immediately. "Mrs. Morales." He approached and extended his hand to me. His grip was firm, warm. "I'm very sorry about the circumstances." "So am I," I said, and my voice sounded more serene than I expected. "Thank you for coming. Please, follow me." Victoria intervened, guiding us down a side hallway I hadn't seen before, to a small room furnished with 2 sofas and a low table. It was evidently a room for intimate visits or difficult conversations. "Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water?" "No, thank you," the notary said with courtesy but firmness. "We need privacy." "Of course." Victoria nodded and withdrew, closing the door behind her. She left us alone. The notary placed his briefcase on the little table and sat on the sofa in front of me. He looked at me attentively, with a gaze that was both analytical and compassionate. "Tell me, Mrs. Morales, what has happened?" And I told him. Everything. From the argument with my children, my night on the bench, finding the false will in the garbage, the confrontation with Roberto, the photocopies of the transfers, his confession that Julio knew everything, and finally, the video, the ultimate truth. While I spoke, he didn't interrupt, he just listened, with absolute attention, taking occasional notes in a notebook he took from his briefcase. His expression was impassive, but his eyes reflected the roller coaster of emotions I was describing. When I finished, I was out of breath, exhausted, empty from so much revealing. He stopped writing and put the notebook aside. "It's an extraordinary story," he said, finally. "And unfortunately, I believe every word." He opened his briefcase and extracted a large envelope of thick and official paper with the notary's seal. "This," he said, placing it on the table between us, "is the holographic will of Julio Antonio Morales. Deposited in this notary office on October 14th of last year. As I told you, it was written in his own hand, dated and signed in the presence of 2 witnesses of my confidence, whose sworn statements are also in the file." I looked at the envelope. It was the materialization of everything, of my salvation, of Julio's last will. "And its contents?" I asked, almost breathless. "As your husband indicated in the video," the notary said, with a slight gesture of respect towards Julio's foresight, "Mr. Morales leaves you the totality of his patrimony, the property at 12 Olivar Street, all his bank accounts, investments, shares, and possessions of any kind. To his children, Roberto Julio Morales and Ana Isabel Morales, he bequeaths the symbolic amount of €1 each." The words, spoken aloud by a legal authority, had a definitive, crushing weight. It was no longer a dream, a video, a hope. It was real. A wave of vertigo invaded me. I had to rest my hands on the sofa to stabilize myself. "And is it valid?" I asked, my voice broken. Even though Anna isn't his biological daughter?" The notary nodded. "Yes, it is. Legislation doesn't annul a will for paternity or maternity issues, unless it's proven that the testator was unaware of that fact at the time of drafting it. And in this case, Mr. Morales not only knew it, but states it in writing in the document itself, as part of his explicit will." He took glasses from his vest pocket and put them on. Then he opened the envelope and extracted several handwritten pages. I recognized Julio's handwriting immediately. Firm, clear, unmistakable. "Allow me to read you an excerpt from the main clause," he said, and cleared his voice. "I leave all my goods without exception to my wife, Elena Maria Fernandez de Morales, as proof of my deep and enduring love for her, and as reparation for the years of pain and silence that my pride and my anger inflicted on both of us. To my children, Roberto and Anna, I thank them for the years of joy they gave me, but I cannot, in conscience, reward their complicity in hiding the truth and their subsequent abandonment of their mother. For this reason, and only for this reason, I bequeath them the amount of €1 each." He fell silent. The silence in the room was absolute. Giulio's words, written in his hand, resonated in the air, filling it with poetic and terrible justice. What should I do?" I finally asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything. The notary carefully put the pages back inside the envelope with reverential care. "The first thing," he said, with a calm and practical voice, "is to get you out of here. You don't have to be in this place. You own a considerable fortune and a house. Do you have somewhere to go? Some relative? Friend?" I shook my head. "No, I have no one." "In that case," he continued, "I suggest we go directly to your house. I'll take care of notifying your children of the existence of this will and its contents. We have to act with speed, but within the law." And if I felt a chill, and if they refused to leave, if they changed the locks? A cold smile drew on the notary's lips. "Mrs. Morales, the law is on your side. The will is irrevocable and of immediate execution. If they refuse, we'll call the police to evict them for trespassing. They know it, or they'll know it as soon as they read this." He gently tapped the envelope with his finger. He stood up. "Are you ready?" I stood up too. My legs were trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from anticipation. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready. Collect your things. I'll speak with the director." I left the little room and walked down the hallway to my room. I felt the gazes of the assistants, of Victoria, who watched the scene from her office door with an expression of total incredulity. I entered room 27, opened the wardrobe, and instead of the suitcase, I began putting my few clothes into a plastic bag I found in a drawer. I didn't care. I would throw all that away. Everything smelled of confinement, of resignation, of lies. When I came out into the hallway, with the bag in my hand, Notary Fernandez was already waiting for me, Victoria beside him, visibly disconcerted. "Mrs. Morales is checking out immediately," he declared, with a voice that admitted no reply. "Arrange the necessary papers. We'll send for her belongings later." "But the procedure's discharge requires prior notice." Victoria tried to protest. "I told you to arrange the papers," the notary repeated, with a coldness that immediately silenced the director. "Or would you prefer I discuss it with the owners of the holding that manages this residence? I know them. We play golf." Victoria paled. "No, it's not necessary. Right away." She turned on her heels and headed at full speed towards her office. Minutes later, I was walking through the main lobby of the Sunset residence, not dragging my feet, but with my head high, followed by Notary Fernandez. The automatic doors opened before us. The fresh air, cold and charged with the smell of damp earth, hit my face. It tasted like freedom. The notary opened the back door of his car for me. Before getting in, I turned to take one last look at the light stone building. It no longer seemed like a prison to me. It looked like a set scenery I had just exited. I settled into the leather seat. The notary started the engine, and we left through the gates, which closed behind us with a final hum. "Are you all right?" he asked me, looking at me through the rearview mirror. "Yes," I said, looking out the window as the city, my city, passed by our side. "I've never been better." The journey to my house, my real house, seemed short to me. Every street, every corner, seemed familiar and dear to me. It was like coming home after a very, very long trip. When the car turned onto Olivar Street and the facade of my house appeared before us, my heart gave a leap. There it was, with its windows, its porch, Giulio's roses, now withered and leafless, and at the entrance, parked with brazenness, was Roberto's sports car. He was here. The notary parked right behind. We both got out of the car. I walked to the gate, the same gate I had closed behind me barely 2 days before, thinking I would never cross it again. I put my hand in my purse. I searched among my things, and there they were. My keys, the same ones I had kept as a useless amulet in the park. I pushed the gate and entered the garden. The notary followed me closely, with his briefcase in hand. I climbed the 2 porch steps. I stopped in front of the main door. I breathed deeply. This was the most important key, the one that would open the last door. I inserted it into the lock. I turned. The door didn't open. It was locked from the inside. From the other side, footsteps were heard, and then Roberto's voice, cold and charged with contained rage, emerged from within. "Go away, mother," he said, "through the wood. This is no longer your house." Roberto's voice, filtered through the thick wood of the door, was another wall, cold, hard, charged with a rage that pretended to be control but escaped at the edges like steam from a pressure cooker. "Go away, mother. This is no longer your house." The words resonated on the porch, bouncing off the familiar facade and rebounding towards me with cruel intention. It wasn't just a refusal, it was an expulsion, a reaffirmation of his victory, of his ownership. Behind me, I felt the calm but firm presence of Notary Fernandez. He was my anchor in that moment of vertigo. Before I could respond, or the notary could intervene, the door opened a few centimeters, just enough to reveal my son's face. He hadn't opened the security chain. His eyes, bloodshot, and with deep dark circles, looked at me with a mixture of contempt and nervousness. His hair, always impeccable, was slightly disheveled. He wore the same clothes from last night. He seemed not to have slept. "Didn't you understand last night?" He spat, his voice a rough whisper. "Have you come back to humiliate yourself more, or to try to blackmail us with your tears?" "Roberto," I began, but my voice sounded weak, drowned by the emotion of being there, so close and so far from everything that was mine. Notary Fernandez stepped forward, positioning himself at my height. His bearing was imposing, his authority silent but absolute. "Mr. Morales," he said, and his tone was the one used in a boardroom, not on the threshold of a house. "I am Antonio Fernandez, your father's notary. We need to talk. Open the door, please." Roberto's face cringed. A crooked, defiant smile twisted his lips. "I have nothing to talk about with you, and even less with her. This house is mine. My sister's and mine. The papers are in order. Now I suggest you leave before I call the police for trespassing." "The only papers in order are the ones your father deposited in my notary office," Fernandez replied, imperturbable. "And no, this house is not yours. Now open the door. I won't repeat it." The tension was palpable, an electric force field between the threshold and the porch. Roberto looked at us, his mind calculating at 1,000 per hour. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, arrogance fighting against panic, the certainty of his lie against the serene authority of the man in front of him. "Hannah," he suddenly shouted, without taking his eyes off us. "Come down, we have visitors." We heard hurried footsteps coming down the stairs. A few seconds later, Anna's pale and anguished face appeared behind Roberto, peeking through the door gap. Her eyes were swollen, glassy. She looked at me, and then at the notary, and her expression was of pure terror. What's happening?" she asked, her voice a trembling thread. "This lady and this man," Roberto said with sarcasm, pointing at us with his head, "seem to believe they have some right over this house." "Roberto, please," Anna pleaded, putting a hand on her brother's arm. "Don't." "Shut up," he snapped at her, shaking off her touch. "Are you going to take her side now, after everything?" "It's not about taking anyone's side," the notary interrupted, taking advantage of the breach. His voice acquired a harder, incisive tone. "It's about the law, and the law is very clear. The will you presented to settle your father's inheritance is null, because there exists a later one, deposited in my notary office, and in it your father leaves the totality of his goods to his wife, Elena Morales, that is, to your mother." The silence that followed was so dense I could hear the beating of my own heart in my ears. Anna emitted a muffled moan, as if she had been punched in the stomach. Her hand went back to grab Roberto's arm, this time forcefully, seeking support. Roberto, however, didn't flinch. His smile hardened even more. "Another will? What are you talking about? The only will is the one you hid?" The notary cut like a whip. "The one Mrs. Morales found in the garbage last night. Yes, we know it, and we also know it's false. A copy altered by your own father to test you, and you, Mr. Morales, have failed, spectacularly." For the first time, I saw how color disappeared from Roberto's face. His confidence was cracking, His eyes blinked rapidly, going from my face to the notary's, looking for a crack, a lie, something to hold on to. That's crazy, he managed to say. But his voice had lost all its strength, sounded hollow, weak. He wouldn't do that. Oh yes, he did, the notary said with glacial calm. He took the official envelope from his briefcase and held it up, like a judge showing irrefutable evidence. The holographic will, written in his own hand, dated and legally registered. Do you want to see it? Do you want me to read you the part where your father bequeaths you, and I quote literally the amount of €1 each? It was the coup de grace. Anna let out a scream, a short and sharp sound of agony, and collapsed against the hallway wall, covering her face with her hands. Her body shook with convulsive sobs. Roberto remained motionless, petrified, looking at the envelope as if it were a snake about to bite him. His jaw was so tight I could see the taut muscles under his skin. His breathing escaped between clenched teeth, in short hisses. No, he murmured, but it was an automatic, empty denial. The evidence, the notary's authority, the demolishing truth was bringing down his facade brick by brick. He could, and he did. Fernandez insisted, lowering the envelope. Now, open the door. We need to talk about the next steps, about the immediate return of all the goods and funds you have misappropriated, and about your departure from this house. The word departure seemed to snap Roberto out of his stupor. His eyes focused again on me, and in them I saw the last and most dangerous ember of his rage flicker, humiliation. Leave, he spat, and a drop of saliva flew from his lips. My house? Because you say so? Because she brings you here with her lies and nonsense? Pointing at me with an accusing finger, his voice rose to become a shout. That's not my mother. She's an adulterous whore who deceived my father and lied to all of us. She doesn't deserve anything. We are his family, his blood. Each word was a knife, but they no longer reached me with the same force. Behind them, I only saw the fear of a cornered child, the rage of a man who sees everything he thought he had slipping through his fingers. Roberto, enough, I said, and my voice sounded clear, calm, surprisingly serene. Open the door. He looked at me, and for an instant I thought he was going to obey. That sanity, or at least the survival instinct, would prevail. But no, with a growl of fury, he stepped back and tried to slam the door shut. The notary was faster. His fine leather shoe interposed itself on the threshold just in time, preventing the door from closing completely. Don't do it, Mr. Morales, he warned, and his voice for the first time showed a steel edge. Forcing entry would be the next step, and it wouldn't be convenient for you. Roberto pushed the door against the notary's foot with all his strength, but it was useless. He was trapped. He panted, his face congested with effort and rage. Move your foot, he shouted. Open the door, the notary repeated, unperturbed. It was Anna who broke the deadlock. With a sudden movement, as if impelled by a spring, she lunged towards the door and with trembling hands, undid the security chain. Anna, what the hell are you doing? Roberto roared, turning towards her. Enough, Roberto, she shouted back, with a voice broken by sobs but full of final desperation. Enough. I can't take it anymore. Look at us. For God's sake, look at us. The door opened wide. For the first time, I could see the entire hallway. It was disordered. There was an open suitcase on the floor, scattered clothes, several boxes stacked against the wall. It looked like they were also packing. Why? To move? To liquidate everything faster? Roberto stood planted in the center of the hallway, with clenched fists, looking alternately at me, the notary, and his sister, who had collapsed against the wall again, crying uncontrollably. He was a cornered, wounded, dangerous animal. Notary Fernandez entered first, calmly, as if he were entering his own office. I followed him, crossing the threshold. The smell of home hit me full force of waxed wood, of the garden jasmines that always perfumed the hallway, of coffee and of something else, of tension, of contained rage, of fear. Now, the notary said, closing the door behind us with a soft click that sounded like the slam of a cell door for my children, we're going to sit down and talk like adults. Or, he added, looking fixedly at Roberto, I can proceed to call the police and my lawyers right now. The choice is yours." Roberto didn't respond. He just looked at us, his chest rising and falling with agitated breathing. His gaze settled on me, and in his eyes there was no longer contempt. There was something worse, a pure, absolute, uncontestable hatred. And I knew in that instant that this hadn't ended, that recovering the house and the money was one thing, but recovering my children, or even finding peace with them, would be a much longer and much more painful battle. The war for the inheritance was over, but the family war, the real one, had just begun. The hallway of my house, always so spacious and welcoming, felt like a recently swept battlefield. The air smelled of raised dust, of dried tears, and of Roberto's expensive cologne, which now seemed poisoned. Ana, collapsed on the floor against the wall, was a whirlwind of silent sobs, her shoulders shaking with a desperation that seemed bottomless. Roberto, standing in the center of the room, was a statue of rage and defeat. His breathing, choppy and furious, was the only sound competing with his sister's crying. Notary Fernandez remained by my side, an imperturbable and solid presence. His leather briefcase, hanging from his hand, was the ark that contained the new destiny of all of us. "The choice is yours, Mr. Morales," Fernandez repeated, his serene voice cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. "I can make that call now, or we can sit down and talk about the process of returning what legally was never yours." Roberto didn't look at the notary. His gaze, loaded with a poison that froze my blood, was nailed on me. It was the gaze of a stranger, of an enemy. "Are you happy?" he spat, the words coming out between clenched teeth. "Have you managed to leave us with nothing? Was that what you wanted? To get revenge on us for wanting the best for you?" The audacity of his lie, of his self-deception, left me breathless. "The best for me," I repeated, and a bitter, dry laugh escaped me. "Throwing me out of my house? Locking me up? Robbing me? Is that the best?" "We were protecting you," he shouted, taking a step forward. Notary Fernandez interposed himself slightly, a subtle but firm movement. Roberto stopped, but his fury didn't yield. "You were senile, wasting money on nonsense, giving it to that man." "Enough, Roberto." Anna's voice emerged from the floor, weak but clear. She raised her head. Her face was swollen, devastated. "Please, enough already. We can't go on like this." "Shut up," he snapped at her, turning towards her as if she were an intruder. "You've always been the weak one, the one who breaks." "I'm the one who has some decency left," she shouted back, getting up shakily. She leaned against the wall. "Look what we've done. Look at Mom. Look what we did to her. She brought it on herself." Roberto roared, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "She lied to us first. To Dad. To us. Anna isn't my sister. She's a stranger's daughter." The silence that followed his shout was absolute. Anna looked at him with horror, as if he had struck her. I closed my eyes. The pain of the revelation, although already known, was as fresh and cutting as the first time. It was Notary Fernandez who broke the spell of hatred. "That," he said, with a calm that sounded superhuman, "is irrelevant to the law and to a mother's love." He addressed Anna. "Miss Morales, what your father knew or didn't know doesn't change that the lady here raised you, loved you, and considered you her daughter every day of her life. That's all that matters." Anna looked at me then, really looked at me. For the first time in years, our eyes met without barriers, without prior reproaches, only with the raw and naked pain of the moment. In her eyes I saw the conflict, the wounded child who felt betrayed, and the woman who saw the precipice her brother had dragged her to. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, and the words were so low that the wind almost carried them away, but I heard them, and they pierced my heart. Roberto let out a snort of contempt. "Pathetic." "Roberto," I said, and my voice sounded tired, worn out from so much pain. "This is over. The notary is right. You have to leave. Now." "Leave? Where?" he asked, with an empty laugh. "To the street? Like you?" "No," Fernandez interrupted. "According to your father's instructions, and as a gesture of good faith from Mrs. Morales, you'll be allowed to remove your personal effects, and you'll be given time, 24 hours, to find a place to go. The funds you misappropriated, that will have to be returned. All of it. To the last cent. My lawyers will take care of liquidating your accounts and properties to compensate for what was spent. The sentence fell on them with the weight of a tombstone. Roberto paled. Anna let out a sob of terror. Liquidate? You can't do that, Roberto shouted, addressing me. They're ours. Dad left them to us. Dad left you €1 each. I replied with a coldness I didn't know I could harbor. And I'll give it to you when you've returned what isn't yours. I saw how panic finally took hold of him, the panic of the businessman who sees his smoke empire crumble. I need that money. I have debts, investments. That's no longer my problem, I said, and I turned my back on him. I couldn't look at him anymore. Every word, every gesture of his was a reminder of how my son, my own son, had become this stranger full of greed and resentment. Pack your things and leave. I walked towards the living room, leaving them in the hallway with the notary. I needed space. I needed to breathe the air of my house, of my real house, without their poison. I sat in Julio's armchair, the one with the worn arm. I rested my head on the backrest and closed my eyes. I felt the ghost of his presence, not as a vengeful shadow, but as a comfort. You did it, Julio. In the end, you did it. I heard movement upstairs. Quick, furious footsteps. Door slams. The sound of suitcases being dragged. Anna came down at some point, her steps slow. Hesitant, she stopped at the living room door. Mom, she said, her voice still trembling. I opened my eyes. She was there, pale, with red eyes, looking younger and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. Is it true? She asked. And her voice was a thread of voice. What Roberto said about my father. I contemplated the possibility of lying, of softening the blow, but there had been too many lies, too many secrets. Yes, Anna, I said, gently. It's true. Luis wasn't my brother. It was a mistake, a huge one, and I've regretted it every day of my life. She nodded slowly, swallowing. Tears returned to her eyes, but this time they weren't of rage. They were of a deep, resigned sadness. I didn't know. Roberto, he showed me the papers last night. After what happened in the park, she said, looking at the floor. It was horrible. I know, I murmured. He knew for a long time, she added, as if confessing a sin. Dad told him, years ago, and he made him promise not to tell me, that he would protect me. A bitter laugh escaped her. Look how he protected me. Your brother, I said, choosing my words carefully, chose your father's hatred over your mother's love. She looked at me, and for an instant I saw the child she once was, the one who ran through this same living room, the one who hugged me at night. And you? Can you love me? After everything, knowing that, Anna, I said, and I stood up, approaching her. You are my daughter. That's all I know, all that matters. I didn't hug her. The abyss between us was still too deep, too recent, but I extended my hand to her. She looked at it, undecided, and then, slowly, put hers over mine. It was a cold, brief contact, but it was a beginning. I'll go to pack my things, she said, withdrawing her hand and turning towards the stairs. Hours later, I saw them leave. Roberto came out first, without looking back, dragging a large suitcase. His car roared when it started and sped away down the street, as if he wanted to flee from shame and failure. Anna came out later. She carried a smaller suitcase and a box. She stopped at the door, looking towards the interior of the house, towards where I stood on the threshold of the living room. Where are you going? I asked. To a hotel. For now, she said, avoiding my gaze. Then, I don't know. I nodded. Anna, when you know where you're going to be, I'd like to know. She looked up, surprised. She nodded, once quickly, and then turned and left, walking fast down the sidewalk to a waiting taxi. Notary Fernandez had stayed a while longer, making calls, ensuring that the locks of my house were mine alone again. When he left, with the promise that his lawyers would contact me the next day, I was completely alone. The silence was absolute. It was no longer broken by tears or shouts. It was a physical, heavy silence. I walked through the empty rooms, Roberto's disheveled, with open drawers and empty wardrobes. Anna's somewhat more orderly, but with the sad aura of the abandoned. Finally, I went up to Julio's study. Everything was just as he had left it. His books, his desk, his armchair. I sat in his chair, running my fingers over the polished wood of the desk. I opened the top drawer. There, inside an envelope, I found a photo. It was of the four of us: Roberto, Anna, Julio, and me. At the beach, Anna would have been about 10 years old, Roberto 12. We were smiling at the camera, happy, unaware of the storms that were approaching. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of lost time, of love that twisted, of lives that took such painful paths. No, not all loose ends were tied. The bond with Roberto was broken, perhaps forever. With Anna, only a tenuous, fragile thread remained, which time and distance would test. The wound of her origin would always be there, a scar that would remind us how fragile family is. But I had my house. I had my clean name. I had the truth, and I had the love of a man who, though wounded, had protected me until his last breath. The next day, a certified letter arrived. It was from Roberto. Inside, without any note, only a check for the exact amount the notary had calculated he owed. His pride, even in defeat, wouldn't allow him to owe me anything. Anna called me a week later. She had rented a small apartment. We talked little, cautiously, about trivial things. But it was a beginning. The days turned into weeks. The house filled again with my essence. I hired a woman to help me with cleaning and shopping. I returned to my routines: the market on Thursdays, mass on Sundays, visits to the cemetery to bring fresh flowers to Julio. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, I saw a young mother pass by with her stroller. The baby was smiling, grabbing his mother's finger with a tiny hand. I smiled. Life went on, with its pains, its betrayals, its losses, but also with its small acts of love, with its second chances. There wasn't a completely happy ending. There were scars, voids, unanswered questions, but there was peace. There was acceptance. And above all, there was a truth that no longer weighed like a slab, but liberated me. I had recovered my house, but, most importantly, I had recovered myself, and for a 78-year-old woman who had lost almost everything, that was enough of an ending. It was, simply, the beginning of what remained to be lived. The end.